getting quite emotional thinking about it. Because really that was their last gig, and it was the last I ever saw John, because he died, a couple of months later.
Okay, well,
okay, there you go. Yeah, that was a great story. Wow. Simon Kirke there talking about, being not only on stage, he had to be out of his mind.
Yeah.
You're on stage with Led Zeppelin. You're playing next to John Bonham. You better bring your A game.
Yeah.
And then, and for Bonham to pass away just a few days later, that's an incredible story. Just for the record here, we're going to be setting up for the Ultimate Rock podcast. We're going to be setting up Facebook pages, Instagram, and on my my iHeartRadio stations throughout the country, the rock and classic rock stations that I'm on, Doc Reno. I will keep everybody informed, also on my social media, on when we get these pages going.
Yeah. Well, this is the Ultimate Rock Podcast with Doc Reno and me, Denny Somack. For this episode, we're bringing you John Bonham stories as we mark the 40 years since the passing of John in 1980. And we're trying to show you this is the kind of stuff you're going to get on this show. You're not going to hear it anywhere else, because these interviews are ours.
Well,
and
one of the greatest things about you, Denny, I mean, we're close friends, but I'm gonna say it because I know you won't. This man has John Bonham on audio, and John Bonham didn't do a lot of interviews. So when you can play on a podcast audio of the late great John Bonham speaking, as you know, he didn't do a lot of interviews. So this is big time. And Bonham gave an interview back in 1970 when the prestigious British music publication Melody Maker, if you're a true fan of rock and roll, you know that magazine, named Led Zeppelin the top rock group after 8 years straight of the Beatles winning that title. So John was asked to compare Zeppelin to the Beatles, which I don't think is a fair comparison. Two totally different types of rock bands, in my opinion. But go ahead, Doug, and play that John Bonham clip there.
Good evening. Tonight, a musical surprise as the Beatles topple.
It's cool, it's groovy, it's number one, the Led Zeppelin.
What?
The Led Zeppelin, but I'm afraid that you and other dads like you may never have heard of them. But this British group has made musical history today. Readers of the Melody Maker have voted them the top world group. The significance is that the Beatles have held this title for 8 years. But now, the Beatles are out. 8 years ago, the Beatles were four clean-cut and clean-shaven young men who had a happy knack for songwriting. The tunes they wrote and sang were evergreens, as hummable and as immortal as I'm Dreaming of a White Christmas and Autumn Leaves. But a new generation was growing up, a generation to whom Bing Crosby and the Ink Spots meant nothing, a generation that demanded a new kind of music. Music like the music of the Led Zeppelin.
The Beatles ran for 8 years, and when one thinks of a song of theirs, Yesterday, which had all sorts of variations played upon it, do you think as musicians you'll be able to last as long as 8 years? Do you think you'll be inventive enough? The old thing about being able to whistle a tune, being able to hum the tune as you go away, I don't think I could hum any of your stuff.
No, but I think it's changing. That's the main thing, you see. I think that's why the awards have changed, because the kids are changing for a start.
That's true.
And so is the music changing. I think there's already a single out of Whole Lot of Love, an orchestra playing it, which is quite interesting, really. The flute plays what the lead vocal would do.
So you're saying that your fans don't necessarily want to whistle the tunes, to hum the tune, but they're much more sophisticated than, my generation.
I think so. Not in that sense. I think these days that let's say the public, it's not just say the kids, because we've had sort of all sorts of people at concerts, I think that they're coming to listen to what you're playing and not just to look at you and see what you are. I mean, I remember when I was, let's go back a few years, when I first went to see the Beatles, because we've mentioned them a few times, it was to look at them, It wasn't, you didn't really bother what you were listening to.
Yes.
And today, it's not what you are, it's what you're playing.
So true.
The words of John Bonham himself. And as you mentioned, Doc, there's very few interviews with John Bonham, so I'm glad we were able to throw that in there. So.
Well, there's some clips that you brought today. We're both Yes fans, and you brought some clips of who I feel is the greatest bass player ever lived, Chris Squire.
I'll agree with you there.
And what's the backstory on this?
Okay, well, if you remember when Zeppelin played the benefit concert at the O2 Arena in London, That was 2007. There were a couple of other artists who played that show, mostly Atlantic-related to open. Chris Squire, being in Yes, which, along with Zeppelin, were the two biggest groups throughout the years. Of course, the Stones were in there, too, for a while. Mm-hmm. Anyway, so Chris, for one, he explains how he got to be the opening act. Can you imagine being the opening act for Zeppelin? Okay, so this is
incredible.
Chris will tell you how it happened. They only did, well, just let Chris tell the story.
I was asked by Phil Carson, who was a long-time employee at Atlantic, and he said that Led Zeppelin were going to reform with Jason Bonham, of course, John's son, playing drums, and they would play the second half. In the first half, there was going to be a variety of Atlantic acts, and he said, "Would you open the show with Keith Emerson doing, ELP's Fanfare for a Common Man, and with Simon Kirke from Bad Company playing drums, and Alan White was playing timpani parts." Yeah, we had a day's rehearsal, and it was a
day
nerve-wracking, but it came off great, and I'm sure at some point there'll be a film of it surfacing, if there probably isn't already.
There is one on YouTube, by the way. I got to tell you,
is there really?
Funny story. I went to see Yes, I think it was like in 2008, 2009. And I said, the first time I had seen Chris in about a year, and I said, "Chris, what was it like playing that show?" And he goes, "Well, it was amazing." And he starts telling me about the backstage. And I said, "Well, did you ever see it?" He goes, "No, I took out my phone. It's on YouTube. I showed it to him." So I'm sitting there watching with Chris Squire.
That's amazing.
Him playing on somebody had filmed it on a YouTube clip. So.
Gotta love the internet, I'll tell you that much. Chris Squire from Yes talking about the Led Zeppelin Celebration Day concert. And Jason Bonham, of course, filled in for his father and was actually on the bill for the first time. Jason filled in at the Atlantic Records 40th anniversary concert. That was back in 1988.
Yeah, and Chris was there as well, because Yes played the...
Right.
Jason was 19 at the time. So Chris has an analysis of Jason. You want to play that, Doug?
The last time I'd seen them was at the Atlantic 40th in 1988 at Madison Square Garden, where their performance left a little to be desired. But in all fairness, Jason was 19 years old or something then. It must have been difficult for him to be doing that show in his father's footsteps. But, 20 years later, Jason has become a great drummer. And the whole power of Zeppelin really comes from the drums, actually. And he played magnificently, and the whole band did.
Yeah. Some nice words there on Jason.
Yeah, and he's right about Jason, too, because that had to be, pretty emotional for him to play in his father's, place that night. We're going to change gears here. We want to talk about Danny Goldberg. Right, Danny?
Well, before that, because I found this clip of Jason talking about how he learned to play drums. So I figured this might be
you have it on your computer?
Yeah, I do.
Okay.
Here.
All right, go ahead.
Doug, can you throw that in?
Quick.
I don't mean to change, but that's the beauty
worries.
of this.
That's the beauty
As
of
we
this.
go along, we can throw in what we want.
Computers, cell phones going off. It's the way it's going to be.
I started to play drums from about the age 4 or 5. I actually don't remember being taught, but it was... I've watched old movie footage of where I'm playing as a child. Mainly I used to play along to jukebox. My dad would program it, and generally I've spoken about before is I'd be woken up in the middle of the night, Dad would come and wake me up and say, "Oh, come and play drums for my friends." And I'd come downstairs in my pajamas and he'd put the jukebox on. I'd play All Right Now or something from Bad Company and Free and
nice.
Stones. And he was just very proud. So that was kind of my, there's the kind of the parties and musicians. Didn't really know anything different. So to me, it was just music.
Before we jump into Danny here, just to say something about that, you've seen Jason Bonham's Led Zeppelin Evening.
Yeah, I
love the show. I think it's phenomenal. But my favorite part of the show is the old clips he shows when he was a kid and his dad is having fun with him and he's playing drums and he tells the stories on stage.
Yeah, and by the way, I got plenty of them. So we got some.
Yeah,
some
this
good
is not the
Jason
first time
Bonham.
we're going to be talking about Led Zeppelin on this podcast.
Yeah, really.
Not with the two of us.
No, we may have to have a segment just dedicated to them. Anyway,
absolutely.
Here's a story I got. This is from Danny Goldberg. Now, name might mean anything to you, but Danny actually he was a publicist, and he was a publicist for Led Zeppelin, actually. And then he ran Swan Song Records in America, and then he became a manager, and, he's done just about everything there is in the business. But he actually was the manager of Nirvana. He signed them, got them signed to Geffen Records. But he told me this story one day, and he said, because of my relationship with Zeppelin and John Bonham.
That's how he got the gig.
Dave Grohl was a nut. But Danny tells the story better than I do.
Dave Grohl loves Led Zeppelin, and he loved to hear stories about Led Zeppelin. He just wanted to really hear stories about John Bonham. My relationship with Dave Grohl consisted primarily of trying to think of John Bonham stories to keep him entertained. But, Kurt Cobain was in charge of what Nirvana did. At that time, whenever there were band meetings, Dave Grohl would just say, "Don't ask me, I'm just the drummer." He'd been a newcomer to the band. I must confess, I had no idea how brilliant he was, that he also was a great singer and a songwriter. In the context of Nirvana, he really was the drummer. But he did love to talk about John Bonham and hear stories about Led Zeppelin. I think to this day, if he could go out with Jimmy and Robert and Jonesy, he would do it in a minute.
Yeah. In case you just missed the name, it's Danny Goldberg, Nirvana's manager there. And one of his John Bonham stories, Denny, when you spoke to Danny, Danny, say that fast 5 times. You also asked him if he was surprised that Led Zeppelin didn't continue after John Bonham passed away.
Yeah, and interesting answer. Doug, hit it.
Robert Plant and John Bonham were very old friends. They came from the same town or the same region of England. And Robert had been through a lot. I think one of his sons died in a tragic illness. The death of Bonham, I think, hit Robert particularly hard. And I was not surprised. I think, again, there was, for example, Keith Moon died young in The Who, and they had another drummer, no problem. And I think Keith Moon was a terrific drummer, but he was not an integral part of the sound of The Who the way John Bonham was an integral part of the sound of The Who.
I disagree with that.
Okay.
They certainly could have done it and made it work as a business, but knowing them personally and knowing how close Robert was to Bonzo, I'm not surprised that he didn't want to continue, and I have a feeling he was the one that didn't want to continue. I was not working for Zeppelin anymore when Bonham died. He died about a year after I left working for them. So I wasn't part of those conversations, but I was not surprised to hear it, no.
Denny, you would know more than I would. Robert Plant is the reason why Led Zeppelin didn't continue on. He was crushed by John Bonham's death.
That's right, absolutely, because who knows, there were, and in future shows, I mean, I even have stories about when they were considering going out without Robert. and Steven Tyler.
And Steven Tyler
rehearsals.
auditioned.
I have an eyewitness to those rehearsals. Steven's personal guy. We sat down one day, and he told me the stories that I've never heard anybody else tell.
I know this is going to piss people off, but that would have been a horrible choice to replace Robert Plant, in my opinion. Not even close vocally. That would have been a disaster. I think we have one more story, and this is from one of my all-time favorite guitar players, Tony Iommi of Black Sabbath. I always tell people, and I said this before the podcast, in my opinion, Led Zeppelin is the greatest rock and roll band ever. And Black Sabbath is a distant second. So those are my 2 favorite bands. But this is Tommy. I'm sorry. Tony. I'm sorry. I'm getting confused here. Yeah. Tony Iommi and John Bonham were very close. Yeah. People might not know this. I didn't know this until Denny told me this. That Bonham was the best man at Tony's wedding ceremony. Right. I did not know that until Denny Somack told me that. Yeah. And Sabbath hails from the Midlands in England, the same area that John Bonham called home. And Bonham would go to Sabbath shows and pester drummer Bill Ward, who can easily be pestered, everything I've read about him, to let him play drums with the band. And let's let Tony Iommi here tell the story.
Well, yes. I mean, John used to come to the gigs, usually come with me. And he'd always say to Bill, can I have a go can I have a go? You know, can I have a go? And Bill let him play the one time, and John broke his kit, broke his snare, and broke his fitments.
That's hilarious. Oh my gosh, that's hilarious! I bet Bill Ward was livid.
Yeah.
Anyway, well, look, we're going to wrap up the podcast here. You had a chance to hear from Alex and Eddie Van Halen, Alice Cooper, Chris Squire of Yes, Tony Iommi